A narcissist doesn't cry when you walk away. They don't beg, don't plead, don't admit that you were once the most valuable thing they had. Instead, they smile. They post pictures. They carry on as if you never existed. And in that moment, you find yourself wondering, was any of it ever real? They make you feel invisible, as if the love, the sacrifices, the unconditional forgiveness you gave never held any worth. They make you question yourself, your kindness, your strength, everything you believed was good and true. But behind that cold, composed mask, a different truth begins to crack. They're starting to realize they just lost the best thing that ever happened to them. This is not a sweet awakening. It doesn't come from gratitude. It comes from an emptiness they can't fill. They once had you, the one who saw the deepest parts of them, the one who stayed when everyone else left. And now, with you no longer there to forgive, to heal, to endure, they're beginning to understand you're not easily replaceable like they once believed. You're the standard no one after you will ever live up to. In today's video, we're going deep into the emotional journey of what happens when a narcissist is finally forced to face real loss. Not just because you left, but because, for the first time in their life, they lost someone who loved them unconditionally without needing control and without wearing a mask. Stay with us until the end of this video, because you won't just understand how they collapse, you'll see clearly why. You were the best thing they ever had, and the one they never deserved to keep. A narcissist doesn't realize you were the best thing they ever had because they never learned how to recognize true value while it was still present. In their world, love isn't a sacred bond between two souls. It's a tool, a game, a mirror to reflect their ego, not a space to truly see another person. When you were still by their side, loving them, being patient with the damage they inflicted, trying to heal wounds they'd never even admit existed, they didn't see that as extraordinary. To them, it was expected. It was your duty. It was just how things were. Because deep down, narcissists believe they're entitled to emotional service, no matter how many times they hurt the one offering it. They saw your forgiveness as weakness, your kindness as dependence. They misread your unconditional love as a lack of self-worth, and because they're emotionally disconnected, they only saw what you did, not why you did it. They couldn't understand that real love is a courageous choice, not a naive mistake. And above all, they couldn't grasp that no one would ever love them the way you did. Your steady presence was a kind of miracle, one they were too emotionally immature to appreciate. In their mind, you'd always be there. You'd always come back. You'd always need them. They lived in a delusion where power was theirs, where you would never be strong enough to actually leave. And because of that, they never thought they had to change, never felt the need to be grateful, and never feared losing you. The more you endured, the more they dismissed you. The more you kept quiet to keep the peace, the more they weaponized your silence. They couldn't tell the difference between gentleness and greatness. They couldn't understand that you stayed out of love, not out of fear. And because of that, they never saw you as someone truly special. You became background scenery in the performance they were staging, never the lead character, until one day, you left. No accusations, no bitterness, just a quiet, sudden absence. And it carried more weight than all your words ever could. That's when their whole illusion started to shake, not because they missed you, but because they couldn't comprehend how someone who once loved them so deeply could disappear without even looking back. In the next part, we'll step into that moment when your absence begins to awaken a truth they were never prepared to face. No one has ever loved them like you did, and no one ever will. After you leave, the narcissist doesn't fall apart right away. They don't lie there sobbing. They don't post long emotional messages or express regret. Instead, they perform. They project a perfect image, someone completely unaffected. They laugh, tell others you weren't anything special, that the relationship was just an old chapter they've already closed. that you were too emotional, too dramatic, and leaving was inevitable. But that's just a mask, a performance, a desperate attempt to hold on to psychological control. What they can't hide, not from others, and not even from themselves, is the growing emptiness inside, a feeling they don't know how to name. Because narcissists don't have a mature emotional framework to process loss, they don't understand true regret. They can't say, "I messed up, I lost someone incredible." But deep in their subconscious, something begins to crack. They start thinking about you, but not the way a healthy person misses someone they love. They miss the function you served in their life, the one who calmed their storms, who mirrored their worth, who loved them without conditions. And now, your silence has taken all of that away. They reread old messages, they watch your online activity, they look for signs that you still care, and when they find nothing, panic begins to set in. Not because you're hurting, but because you're not hurting. You're living, healing, thriving without them. And that deeply threatens their fragile ego. In their confusion, they may start to bait you. Vague texts, questions sent through mutual friends, cryptic social media posts. But if you stay silent, if you don't respond, that silence becomes the loudest message you've ever spoken. Because silence, from someone who once forgave, once gave everything, once loved that deeply, is not avoidance. It's a bold declaration: I've seen the truth, and I choose to let go. At this point, their confident front starts to crumble. The performance becomes strained. Your silence forces them to face a question they've spent their entire life avoiding. Did I just lose the one person who truly cared for me? And in the next section, we'll dive into that pivotal psychological shift, when the fear of losing control turns into an obsession. The haunting realization, far too late, that you were the only one who ever saw who they really were and still chose to love them. At some point, the narcissist begins to face a strange, unfamiliar feeling, one they can no longer control or hide. It doesn't come from conversations with friends. It doesn't come from someone bringing up your name. It comes from the prolonged silence. No response, no return, no cracks left open for them to slip through and re-establish control like they used to. At first, they try to explain it away with distorted logic, that you're playing games, that you're pretending, that you'll come back like you always did. But over time, those explanations lose their power, and a truth begins to rise, so undeniable they can no longer escape it. You really left, and this time it's for good. That's when a psychological shock sets in. The narcissist begins to feel a void, one that no new supply can fill. They may have jumped into another relationship, clung to someone new the way they once clung to you, but unlike you, the one who is patient, forgiving, and loved without keeping score, this new person doesn't reflect the beautiful image they crave. The new person has boundaries. The new person sees through the facade. The new person doesn't make them feel special the way you did. And then the comparisons begin, quiet but brutal. They remember how you looked at them, with no contempt, no suspicion, just genuine care. They remember how you stayed after their outbursts, not out of weakness, but because you once believed love could heal. They remember deep conversations, warm embraces that made them feel like a real human being, not some polished version of themselves. That's when they finally see it. They lost the one person who saw their worth, even before they could see it for themselves. And that realization, if not met with true self-awareness, doesn't lead to repentance. It leads to obsession. A narcissist doesn't know how to love in a healthy way. They love through possession, through fear of abandonment. And when they realize you are the best thing they ever had, they don't grieve in humility, they want you back. Not because of who you are, but because of what you represented. You were proof of their worth. And now that you're gone, so is that illusion. That's why they'll do everything they can to pull you back in, not out of love, but out of desperation to avoid the emptiness inside. You may receive apologies, promises of change, even tears, but don't be fooled. Because if you go back too soon, the cycle will repeat. The hunger for control will return, and you'll lose yourself all over again. Only when you stand firm, when you keep walking without looking back, will the narcissist be forced to confront the ruins they created. No one left to blame, no one left to manipulate, nothing left to prove. Just one raw, painful truth. They lost the only person who ever saw the humanity in them and chose to stay. And that obsession, the thing that haunts them, is not your departure. It's why you left. A narcissist can pretend they feel nothing. They may flaunt new relationships, showcase embellished achievements, even act carefree, like you never existed. But beneath that surface lies a painful truth they cannot and will not face. The pain of losing the only person who ever truly loved them. They don't cry the way you once did. They don't wrestle with longing the way you did. But that doesn't mean they feel nothing. In fact, narcissists feel a great deal, but their emotions are distorted by an oversized ego and an overactive defense system. Instead of sadness, they feel humiliation. Instead of regret, they feel anger. And instead of taking responsibility, they hide and shift blame. In a narcissist's inner world, your departure isn't just a loss, it's a collapse of their entire framework. Because you weren't just a partner or a presence. You were the only mirror they had to reflect a carefully curated image of themselves, one they desperately clung to. And now, that mirror is shattered. They can't replace what they lost, because no one else ever saw them the way you did. No one else ever looked past their masks and chose to stay. And what hurts them most isn't just your absence. It's the memory that you once saw the darkest parts of them and still stayed until they gave you no choice but to leave. That's something they will never forgive. Not you, but themselves. A narcissist can move on with new relationships, but deep inside a silent wound continues to bleed. It's the wound of unspoken regret, of memories they try to suppress, but that return with force in the quiet of the night. When the spotlight is off, when no audience remains, they are faced with a question they can't bear to answer. Why did the one person who truly loved me have to walk away? The answer terrifies them, because deep down they know the truth. They destroyed the best thing they ever had, not because that person wasn't enough, but because they themselves were never good enough to deserve that kind of love. So they'll try to repair the irreparable. They'll send vague messages, stir up nostalgic moments, drop passive reminders, not to apologize sincerely, but to see if they still hold any power over you. That's not love. It's desperation dressed as emotion. But if you're strong enough now, if you've entered the season where your heart no longer needs their validation, you'll see the truth they keep buried. They are deeply wounded, but too prideful to admit it. They may act like you never mattered, but the truth is, you were the greatest test of their life, and they failed. Not because you asked too much, but because they couldn't protect what they never learned to value. And that's when you realize you were never the one who lost. You were the one who gave. And when your love wasn't honored, you were strong enough to take it back. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself. After you walked away, the narcissist may have quickly jumped into a new relationship. On the surface, they seem stable, even happy, but that's just a thin coat of paint covering a cracked foundation. Because sooner or later, the inevitable happens. They start to compare. First, the comparisons aren't obvious. They'll deny it. They'll tell the new person that life is better now. They'll convince themselves that the new partner is easier, less demanding, more agreeable. But slowly, in scattered moments, the past creeps in, and they begin to notice differences they can't ignore. They start to remember the things you used to say, the things no one else ever dared to. They recall how you saw through their smile and gently asked, "Are you really okay?" They remember the times you went quiet, not to manipulate, but to protect your own heart from further harm. They remember how you forgave, not out of weakness, but because you still had hope, and when they look at the new person, they realize something is missing. Not beauty, not obedience, but depth. The new person might admire them, but they don't understand them. They might listen, but they don't feel the hidden layers within, because only you, the one who loved them beyond the mask, ever truly could. It's in this moment that the narcissist starts to feel something they deeply despise, a sense of loss. They feel like something intangible but haunting has slipped through their hands, a presence that once made them feel seen, understood, and even terrified, because you saw the parts of them they desperately tried to hide. And so they try to recreate the experience they had with you through new people, new scenarios, distorted memories. But nothing quite lands. They try to repeat the things that used to make you smile, try to reenact the same romantic scripts, but without you, it all feels hollow. The sad truth is, they will never admit this out loud, because in the narcissist's world, acknowledging that you were the only one who ever truly touched their soul is unforgivable, not to you, but to their fragile ego, and so they keep searching for you in others. But the more they search, the more they realize you cannot be replaced, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. You were the one who loved them in the chaos, who embraced the human side of them that even they couldn't accept. You didn't leave when it was easy. You left when it hurt the most. And that's what made you the one they admire, resent, and can never forget. But now you're gone. You no longer need their validation. You no longer seek answers in their eyes. And that very fact makes you untouchable and completely irreplaceable. Because nothing can replace a love that was real. After all the comparisons, the attempts at replacement, and the layers of masks constantly being repainted, the narcissist eventually has to face a painful truth. They were the reason the best thing in their life fell apart. And that's a truth their ego was never built to handle. At first, they fight it off with excuses. They tell themselves, you changed, that you weren't as gentle anymore, that you became too sensitive, too demanding. They need someone to blame. Because to admit they destroyed someone who loved them with sincere, wholehearted devotion would mean watching their entire internal defense system collapse. But time spares no one, and as it moves forward, there are fewer lies left to cling to. The stories they tell themselves start to contradict reality. The narratives they tell others about you no longer bring them comfort, because deep down, they know they were the one who pushed you away. They begin to remember the little details, the sadness in your eyes when you stopped believing their promises, the softening of your voice as you held back another wave of disappointment, and that final moment when you turned your back to leave. Not in anger, but in a quiet, soul-deep sorrow. That's when the regret starts to take root, not as a passing longing, but as a confrontation with guilt they'd never truly acknowledged before. No one forced them to feel remorse. No one demanded that they change. But in the absolute silence, when there's no one left to blame, no one left to control, they're left alone with themselves, staring into the void you once filled with love, loyalty, and forgiveness. And they realize you weren't weak for loving someone like them. You were strong, because you saw their humanity and still chose to stay until it began to hurt you too much to continue. Now that you're gone, now that you've learned to love yourself, to heal, and to move forward without them, what haunts them is no longer loneliness. It's the pain of being left behind by the one person who truly knew them and still chose to love them. No one after you will be able to do that, and no matter how far they search, they'll only find blurred reflections. Not you. At this point, they no longer want to return for control. What they crave is something they can never have again, true forgiveness. But by now, you've changed. You're no longer the one clinging to their approval. You no longer need them to feel whole. Because they've already taught you the most valuable lesson of all. That real love cannot grow from manipulation, and that your worth should never be placed in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to cherish it. And so they are left behind, not because of your coldness, but because of your growth. A journey they were never willing or able to take with you. Hence, a narcissist reaches this final stage. They no longer fight. They've tried denial, they've lashed out in anger, they've attempted to replace you, they've played every role imaginable just to cling to a shred of control. But now, when none of those tactics work anymore, they're left to face what they've always avoided, the truth. And that truth doesn't require you to speak it aloud. It doesn't need a letter exposing everything or a final conversation to find closure. That truth lives in your unwavering silence, in the calmness of your eyes as you look at them like a stranger, in the way you keep living stronger, forward, without looking back. To a narcissist, silence isn't just emptiness, it's a sentence, not one delivered with screaming or revenge, but with the total absence of power. They can no longer define you, label you, or control your emotions. And that undoes them in ways no one around them can see, because the truth has its own power. It doesn't need weapons, it doesn't need witnesses, it only needs time. And over time, as every replacement begins to see the hollowness of their relationship, as no one remains willing to stand in the cycle of love, harm, apology, remet, the narcissist finally begins to feel the real consequence of their choices. A lingering, gnawing emptiness. At that point, they don't just grieve losing you. They grieve losing what you represented, the final chance they had to truly change, and they threw it away. Because you weren't fragile like they believed. You were someone who loved them deeply enough to sacrifice, and strong enough to walk away. When will they finally realize you were the last mirror that ever reflected their truest, most human self, the act of facing their own unfiltered reflection, with no praise, no illusion, no one left to admire, becomes the final punishment they must carry for the rest of their life. You no longer need their apology. You don't need them to come back, knock on your door, or express remorse, because the truth has already been established. And it doesn't need validation. You were the best thing that ever entered their life, and you left not because you were weak, but because you woke up. If you've ever been in a relationship marked by pain with a narcissist, remember this. You don't need their recognition to confirm your worth. Your decision to walk away wasn't a failure. It was light, choosing to walk away from darkness. You loved yourself enough to stop living inside a cycle that only drained your soul. And if today you are on your healing journey, please believe this. You are the most extraordinary thing they will never have again. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real.